Hey guys, I'm finally back to finish the Saturn series. I did a previous video a while ago about Saturn through houses 1 through 7, and I'm going to finish that off, this time do Saturn houses 8 through 12. So just to brush up a little bit on what Saturn means in your chart, it is a malefic planet, which is a planet that's typically known for being a difficult influence on our lives. Sometimes the most difficult. It can indicate where what sector in your life you naturally sort of feel held back in, and you have to sort of focus more energy on whatever this topic is, and getting past your initial holdups, because if you don't, it'll become more hard for you. And especially when you reach your Saturn return, or you have 2 to 3 Saturn returns in your life. So when you reach your Saturn return, it'll be even more hard if you don't work on these things. And if you currently are dealing with your Saturn return, these are going to be the things that you will be faced to deal with. But it sort of just naturally is there in your life since you're born. So the houses 1 through 6, I included 7 in the last one too, but the houses 1 through 6 are more sort of personal houses. They're more sort of like your own things and your own issues. And houses 7 through 12 are also, they can also apply to like your own things. Obviously it's your birth chart, it's your own thing, but it can also indicate outside forces from other people and just sort of higher things, more vast type scenarios, starting with the 7th house, which is relationships, which I covered in the last one. But anyway, let me jump into it. Okay, so Saturn in the 8th house is going to be, this is not really the worst one. In fact, it's interesting because the 8th house can represent death, transformation. So people with Saturn, which is a planet that sort of stops things, can actually live a long life, because they're sort of like, to me, the way I look at Saturn in the 8th house is people that will live a long life, but that almost have to deal with the idea of not being able to reach that other realm. And you might think, well, why would anyone actually want to die? And that's not, I mean, lots of people do, obviously, but it's not saying like, oh, you struggle because you don't you don't have to die. It's more like, and obviously we all do in the end, but okay, this just got real morbid real fast, but I started with the 8th house, so what do you know? It's more like sort of just transformation and psychological transformation and dealing with your demons and kind of doing that full circle type idea about life and death and the world is more difficult for you. Like, I feel like Saturn in the 8th house people have more difficulty facing their demons. And the other thing is, the 8th house can do with anything that's like dark, like anything to do with like, sex addiction or love, any type of addiction, drug addiction, alcoholism, anything that's sort of over excess, but in a addictive sort of dark way, where the 5th house is more like fun excess, the 8th house is a little more like doing too much. And the thing with Saturn being there is that a lot of times these people can be very anti that, because they don't really see the pleasure in it. But the really difficult thing about this is if these people do get addicted to anything, it can be very hard for them to quit. That is one of the things. So people with Saturn in the 8th house should not partake in any type of addictive substance, because it's really hard for them to quit and to go through those transformations. And also they can be somewhat sexually stifled in a way, like maybe they're not as in touch with their sexual nature, or they can't like get sex as easily, or just having some type of sexual holdback with other people and with themselves. Okay, so moving on to the ninth house. So the ninth house is all about higher education. It's about beliefs, religion, spirituality. It's also about long distance travel. So people with Saturn in the ninth house, I feel like a lot of times can be in a scenario sometimes where they are not able to travel, or where they have some type of doctrination, religion, some type of higher structure that's been imposed on them, to where they feel like they can't really, there's not a lot of room to budge or room to grow for them initially, at least in their spiritual like world. You know, I've noticed actually a lot of like princes and princesses, you know, royal families over in Europe and the UK and other places have this placement because they're born into a situation where, although most people might envy them, actually they're kind of in this box of like, you know, they can't really just go off and do whatever they want because they sort of naturally have this structure. So people that are born with that can feel like they're held back by whatever belief is imposed on them, or whatever education is imposed on them. Like, okay, you're gonna have to be in school for 25 years, have fun, you're not getting out of it, kind of thing. And sometimes they can feel like it's not fun. Like the idea of all these things that people really value, the idea of seeking your higher calling and finding your spirituality and traveling the world and da-da-da-da-da, to them it doesn't seem as fun, or maybe they can't kind of tap into that. And like I said, with anything related to Saturn, you can get there. You just have to try harder than most people. Yeah, okay. So then Saturn in the 10th house. This one is kind of like not what you'd think. Because Saturn's natural ruler is Capricorn, and Capricorn rules the 10th house. So naturally, you'd think Saturn is at home here. It is at home there. Naturally, Saturn in the 10th house is kind of almost where it should be. So it's not the worst one to have, definitely. But the thing about the 10th house, it's all about recognition, career, being acknowledged, being known by people, the way that society as a whole sees you, and kind of like your image and stuff like that on a higher level. And having Saturn here can mean that, okay, like my best friend has this placement. She's never had social media, ever. Never had Facebook, never had MySpace, never had Instagram, never had anything. Maybe she had MySpace. Anyway, basically does not have social media. And to me, that's very Saturn in the 10th, because it's like everyone being able to see you and everybody knowing what you're about and all that like glorified 10th house stuff. You're like, no. Okay, so it's kind of being people that are maybe afraid of being in the spotlight. There's also a lot of very, very, very famous people that have that are very much in the spotlight, but they've had difficulties getting there, and a lot of people criticize them. A lot of people analyze their every movement and say, oh, they did this, or, you know, just people ridiculing them, because the 10th house can be very authority and stuff like that. So people with Saturn in the 10th can feel like the recognition that they do get isn't always good, and can sometimes almost bring them down and make them feel like, even though they've worked so hard to get to the top, like people don't want them there, or they feel like they could just be brought down at any moment, you know, or like they have to sort of prove themselves more. Like two people I can think of off the top of my head that have that are Kim Kardashian and Miley Cyrus. You know, Kim is so famous, and yeah, a lot of people love her, but a lot of people criticize her, and a lot of people want to tear her down. You know, Miley Cyrus, same thing. It's kind of like whatever you do that's in the spotlight will be judged harsher than other people. And since most people that follow me most people in general are not celebrities, doesn't mean you have to be a celebrity to like experience this. It's more just like any type of public life, and this can be your career too. You also have difficulty with your career. Like, you're a harder worker, but being in the spotlight or kind of stepping into your power may A, feel naturally just blocked, like you can't get there, and B, you might not be comfortable with that spotlight and feel like you want to give it to someone else, or feel like it's almost like the idea of really flourishing in your career feels like not a thing for you, but it can be. So, and also people might look at you as being a very stern person, or being as somehow, you know, since the 10th house can do with image, is like they might see you as being overly serious or overly stern or overly someone who takes himself too seriously, or who's just too, you know, Saturn-like. It's almost like having Saturn in the first house, but on a more, first house would be someone who meets you, 10th house would be someone who has never met you before. Okay, 11th house. 11th house is about friendships and social groups. So Saturn in the 11th can be difficult. These people can have difficulty relating to others. When they're in a group setting, they may feel like isolated. They may feel like they don't fit in, but not in a, oh, I'm so unique, I don't fit in, I'm just like so different, but more like, oh, there's just something I don't fit in. Like, there's just something blocking you from fitting with other people. You may feel like people look at you as being like the serious friend, or the one that never wants to just like let loose and have fun, or you know, you can sort of feel like you can just feel lonely, and even people with this placement that do have multiple friends, they can still feel lonely. And this can also apply to like just society as a whole, not even just your own friendships, but society as a whole. Like, you know, you may feel like you may have more strict like political views, or just anything that involves groups and a bunch of people kind of rising up. You're kind of the person in the back watching, being like, I'm not into this, or just not being very vocal or open about your opinions on society, and not really fitting into like what everyone else is doing as a group, as a community. You may feel like you don't have a community. It might be hard for you to find that community. And the last one, Saturn in the 12th house, this can be notoriously difficult because the 12th house is so vague and Saturn is so strong and stern, that having such a strong, stern planet in such a vague house can be like Saturn gets lost in this like abyss of 12th house. So this can be like anything that you think of related to Saturn, but in a thing that you can't really grasp. Like, all of these other houses have a specific, like, this, and this. 12th house is kind of like the unknown, your subconscious, your dreams, your past, your psychic connection. All these things can feel lost to you. Like, you know, any of the psychic inclinations that you have may feel like you don't know what is really psychic and what is just a guilty conscience. And naturally you have sort of a guilty conscience because Saturn is sort of at the back of your mind telling you you're not good enough, or just sort of giving you this negative voice that you don't know where it's coming from, almost like a lot of insecurities that seem to come from nowhere. Like, okay, you have no reason to be insecure, but you're insecure. Why is that? That can be a Saturn thing. And you may also just feel, a lot of people with this placement can feel depressed. They can struggle with depression. They can feel isolated. They can just feel kind of scared about everything and not know why. And just a lot of, these people really have to work on dealing with their subconscious, dealing with like analyzing their dreams, analyzing their self-talk, analyzing what's happening when they're not conscious, and why, if they feel bad, is this coming from a place in the back of their mind? Because if so, that's probably Saturn. And a lot of these people can struggle with depression, like I said, and like drugs and stuff like that, because it's hard to deal with. So that's all I have for Saturn. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll post a new video on something else soon.